Now, here's the important bit. Colonialism isn't something that happened in just history books. It's still around today, quietly influencing how we think, how we act, and even how we run our businesses. And here's the thing, without us even knowing.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
The doors to my 10-week signature program, Represented, are now open and enrollments are taking place. Represented program is specifically designed for heart-led online business owners like you, committed to creating safer, inclusive spaces for everyone, especially those who've historically been left out. Through Represented, you'll understand how biases, including those in AI tools, impact your business and how to actively address them. You'll move beyond performative actions, embedding genuine, conscious inclusivity into your everyday practices. And you'll gain practical strategies to confidently navigate conversations around race and equity, making meaningful and lasting change. If you've been experiencing the pull to do business more intentionally in a way that feels good on the inside and allows you to live out your values, you are in the right place, my friend. I'll help you build an AI bias-aware business that reflects a more humane world, one that lifts those most underrepresented so we all rise together. Because a just society is only as strong as those with the least privilege. Head over to anikishuru.com/represented for all the details. The live round commences on 10th April and scholarships are available to those who may need them. That link again is anikishuru.com/represented, and I have that in the show notes. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Represented. After our last two episodes showcasing powerful stories from my students, we had Sarah and we had Tanya on their journeys towards racial equity. I realized it was essential for us to step back and address a really, really important component of racism, which is colonialism. Understanding the history and legacy of colonialism is key because it deeply influences our mindsets, practices, and values as online business owners today. By examining events like the Berlin Conference, which happened in 1884, and I'll share a little bit more as the episode progresses. This was when European leaders came together and they were planning on how to divide and conquer the African continent. And there's a lot for us to gain from listening to that story, from understanding how history, how things were set up in the past, and why we are where we are today, and how that applies to us as business owners. And so really how colonial practices have evolved globally. And I really want us to gain a clearer picture of how these historical roots shape our current business approaches, and begin paving a meaningful path toward what is genuine equity and inclusion. And so, what I love to do, and I love history because it really paints, it gives us a place to begin, and it allows us to understand how did we get here. And then as we take steps forward, we're able to be able to do things with understanding, with greater knowledge, that we're not just doing things because so and so said to do this thing, but we're doing it because we're coming from a place of understanding. And that is what leads to that genuineness, that genuine equity and inclusion. So let's start by breaking down colonialism. I want you to imagine one nation deciding to step into another land, establishing control and using that region's resources mainly for their own benefit. It's essentially about exploiting people economically, dominating politically, and suppressing or erasing cultures to enforce their own ways. Now, here's the important bit. Colonialism isn't something that happened in just history books. It's still around today, quietly influencing how we think, how we act, and even how we run our businesses. And here's the thing, without us even knowing. And so I want us to take a step back and have a little bit of a history lesson. When we know what happened in the past, as I said, it can help us understand why things in the present day we live in operate the way they do. So we know colonialism has been there since time immemorial. I mean, going back to the days of Jesus, the BC times and AD times, it was there. But I want us to move a little bit forward into modern colonialism, which began with Portugal's colonization of Ceuta in North Africa back in 1415. Now, Ceuta, if you are not accessible to a map, I just want to paint the picture for you. Ceuta is in the very northern tip, northwest, very northern west tip of Africa. It is, you've got the Mediterranean Sea right above it, and on the left-hand side, you've got the Atlantic Ocean, and then it is bordered by two countries. You've got Morocco at the bottom of it, and then to the right, you've got Algeria. And so that's where Ceuta is. And Ceuta is really close to Portugal, just separated from the European, Europe continent through that Mediterranean Sea. And so really close to Portugal. So Portugal's conquest marked the beginning of European exploitation, and exploring and expanding its way through other borders. So Ceuta was strategically chosen because it provided Portugal with direct access to African trade routes, offering valuable commodities like gold, spices, and slaves. So by establishing a foothold, Portugal demonstrated that significant profits could be gained through overseas control, laying the groundwork for future colonial ambitions. So when we think about modern colonialism, that's kind of where it started, and this idea was birthed. Now, this model quickly became the blueprint for other European powers. Spain, which is right next door to Portugal, was really inspired by Portugal's success. And they began to embark on extensive colonization in the Americas, capturing vast territories and exploiting indigenous populations for labor and resources. Then Britain and France soon followed, establishing colonies across North America, Africa, and Asia, driven by similar motivations of wealth, resources, and global dominance. The Netherlands also carved out extensive colonies in the East Indies, specifically present-day Indonesia, creating powerful trading hubs. Collectively, these nations propelled a new era of global influence, altering economies, societies, and ecosystems profoundly. And the key word here, my friend, is permanently, because we're still feeling it today. Now, fast forward, not to present day, but to 1884 in Berlin, Germany, where European leaders convened without any African representatives. They formalized rules for dividing Africa, a continent seen merely as territory to be carved up and exploited. This event, known as the Scramble for Africa, ignored existing communities, cultures, and economies, leading to devastating consequences still felt today. Now, if you want to read up a little bit on this, there's some really great historians that you should look up. There's Thomas Pakenham and Walter Rodney. They have detailed the far-reaching impact, including cultural loss, economic deprivation, and the long-term instability across the entire continent of Africa. Now, the Berlin Conference established the principle of effective occupation. Get this, effective occupation, meaning European powers needed a physical presence in territories to claim them officially. Now, this policy accelerated colonization, resulting in artificial borders that split ethnic groups, combined viral communities, and disrupted traditional ways of life. The consequences were devastating. We're talking about forced labor systems, resource extraction without reinvestment, of course, widespread violence, and resistance. It was brutally suppressed. Now, the legacy of these artificial borders and colonial exploitation continues to affect African nations, causing political and economic instability, again, even to this day. And so, from the Berlin Conference, this set an international standard. Its outcomes inspired similar colonial practices in regions like India, the Caribbean, Indochina, and Indonesia. The British Empire, for instance, systematically exploited India's vast resources, disrupting local industries and agriculture. French colonialism in Indochina similarly focused on extraction and control, leaving a legacy of conflict and division. Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia was marked by extreme economic exploitation and cultural suppression, which profoundly affected the local societies and economies. These colonial methods established global economic inequalities that persist to this day, creating systems in which former colonizers often retain significant economic and political influence over their former colonies. This has resulted in ongoing struggles with poverty, dependency, and political turmoil in formerly colonized nations in the entire world. And so you're probably wondering, Annie, but how does this history influence me as an online business owner today? Well, allow me to explain. A colonial mindset is subtle yet pervasive, showing up as extraction without acknowledgement or compensation, dominating narratives and prioritizing profit. I'll say that again, prioritizing profit above equity and inclusivity. For instance, consider how wellness practices from marginalized cultures are appropriated and commercialized, often without credit or respect for their origins. Additionally, we can see colonial dynamics at play in marketing strategies that prioritize exploiting trends from underrepresented communities without meaningful inclusion or acknowledgement. Now, beyond cultural appropriation, this colonial mindset manifests through capitalism-driven narratives that prioritize relentless growth and profit, often ignoring sustainable practices or equitable wealth distribution. It also appears through patriarchal structures prevalent in coaching industries where hierarchical leadership and dominance overshadow collaborative and inclusive approaches. And to add on, what I've seen is exclusivity in pricing strategies that limit accessibility to premium coaching services. And this can really echo colonial era class divides, excluding marginalized groups from essential resources and opportunities for growth. That's why we continue to see the rich getting richer and those with little getting less and less. Another final example is the dominance of Western business models, which often overlook or marginalize alternative approaches rooted in different cultural contexts. For example, what may work in the West may not necessarily work in other cultural backgrounds. For example, and what comes to mind right now for me is when it comes to having children or giving birth, the way women give birth, for example, in Africa, in Kenya, is not necessarily the same way that women may give birth here in Australia. There are different ways in which the women will get support from the midwives, and how the whole process goes down is different. How once you have your baby, how you care for your baby, how you tend to their needs, the co-sleeping, the need to be right there and carrying babies on our backs, which is very, very different to Western culture. Western culture will tell you that, co-sleeping is not safe and that a baby should have a specific place where that they sleep and they sleep in a certain way. They either sleep facing up so that they don't suffocate if they're facing down. You wrap them so that it kind of imitates how it was when they were in the womb. And all these things that's Western culture, but there is another way of doing things that is different, but that doesn't make it wrong. And so when you bring it back to business, this mindset, if we apply it in business, it perpetuates power imbalances and continuous cycles of exploitation and maintains barriers for, like when I think about, businesses that do not have access and want to get access to get, the best coaching, business owners seeking equitable participation in global markets are not able to do that. And so this is something for us, especially as space holders, we are inviting people into our spaces for us to support them. We really need to understand the ways in which this colonial mindset could be coming in and potentially influencing how we hold space. And so, where to from here? I just want you to take some time to reflect on these realities so that we have an opportunity to do things differently. As I said, different doesn't mean bad. Different is actually an opportunity to rethink how we do things, to take responsibility, and ultimately to grow and to grow positively. And so, if you're listening to this podcast in real time, as in the time of this podcast being released, the doors to my signature program Represented are open and enrollments are taking place. This program is such a great foundation to begin your journey into racial equity or to continue that journey if you've already begun it in some way or other. Head over to anikishuru.com/represented for all the details. We commence this Thursday, 10th April.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.